With this session update, I'm Shannon Lurkey. During a meeting of the Senate Tax Committee, members considered a bill that would allow state tax deductions for private school tuition. Here's that portion of the meeting.
Members, our third item on the agenda is Senator Eichorn's bill, and that is Senate File 1153. Senator Eichorn, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for accommodating my schedule today so I could have my hearing in veterans as well, which went very well. So we appreciate that.
Great.
Senate File 1153 in front of us. I would like to thank my co-sponsors, Senator Jasinski, Chamberlain, Coleman, and yourself, Madam Chair. Senate File 1153, under current law, individuals may subtract up to specified amount of education-related expenses for purpose of calculating Minnesota taxable income. This bill clarifies the language limiting the K-12 expense subtraction to expenses not claimed in the credit, increases the subtraction to $2,600 for each qualifying child in kindergarten through grade 6, and $3,900 for each qualifying child in grades 7 through 12, adds tuition to the allowable expenses, and increases the K-12 credit amount to $1,500 and the income threshold to $50,000, and modifies the phase-out schedule, and requires the credit be adjusted annually for inflation. The education tax credit was originally passed in 1997, and the amounts for the credit and deduction have not been updated since 2001. The bill increases the amounts of the credit and the deduction to help families pay for additional education expenses that they incurred this year, needed more now than ever due to the pandemic. During the last year of distance learning, we know that those students are already struggling under the worst achievement gaps in the country, and they have lost ground. This bill helps address the achievement gap by allowing families to use the tax credit and/or deduction for tutors, summer camps, and other education enrichment opportunities to make up for these learning deficits. This bill ensures education equity. Middle-class families have been able to take the deduction for tuition for years, but low-income families cannot use the tax credit for tuition. Many low-income families, or we should give low-income families the same opportunities that middle-class families have had for years and allow parents to make the best choices for their children's education. I know, Madam Chair, you've heard other bills similar to this. I believe Senator Rest has one coming up after me. So this just gives you a lot of tools in your toolbox as you go to put your omnibus bill together. And this is just something we think is a tangible way we can help families this year in this tough time. I mean, there's so many kids, and all of us can have a story from our district, I'm sure, about a kid that's been out of school that is going to need that extra help. And this little piece will go a long way to help those families get their kids caught up, whether it's part of a summer school or something else or other enrichment opportunities. I think this is an important piece. So I really appreciate the opportunity to present this today and have this discussion. And that's what I have for now, and would like to hand it over to the testifiers.
Thank you, Senator Eichorn. Our first testifier is Dawn Beavers, a parent from Stillwater. Welcome to the committee. Ms.
Hello.
Beavers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee, for your time this morning. My name is Dawn Beavers, and I'm here as a parent of a middle schooler living in the East Metro area. I'm a former public high school science teacher, assistant principal, and varsity coach. I stopped teaching when our daughter arrived 13 years ago, and then we moved to Ohio and then here to Minnesota. Our daughter has gone to a public charter school and to a local public school. At the start of the pandemic, when schools were shut down, we saw a huge shift in our daughter and her motivation. Our daughter's an only child and an extrovert, and she needed some social interaction. When we thought that school closures were just for a short time, we encouraged her to hang in there and to go outside, socialize with friends, 6 feet apart, of course. In the fall, when our school district started back hybrid, the students actually learned in their individual computers in their homeroom class. We continued to see our daughter's mood, attitude, and motivation decline. She started seeing a therapist for depression. She all of a sudden hated school. Our straight A honor roll student was struggling because she was not doing as well as she did in in-person learning, and that gave her great anxiety. She could not see her teachers face-to-face and didn't feel comfortable asking questions on her Zoom meetings. She kept saying how dumb she was. When the talk of closing down our hybrid model started, her therapist suggested that we consider a private school for her, at least until the pandemic was over. She saw additional anxiety with even the discussion of moving to full-time distance learning again. The day our district decided to move to full distance learning was the day that we switched her to a private school. The difference for her has been extraordinary, so much so that no matter what happens next year, she won't be returning to public school. So I feel that our daughter is a very prime example of why all children don't always do best in the public school setting, even though that's where I taught. I feel that parents should be able to choose the best path for their child and should not have to worry about the financial burdens of a quality education that every child deserves. The legislators' support of this bill to expand the current tax credit will allow families struggling to pay for necessary educational expenses, whether that is in public, private, or charter school. If any year has taught us that one size does not fit all when it comes to education, it's been this past year. Madam Chair and members of the committee, thank you so much for your time and for listening to our story.
Thank you, Ms. Beavers. Our next testifier is Anya Taylor, a parent from St. Paul. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Anya Taylor. I'm a parent living in St. Paul. I'm a single mother of 3 sons. I have, my oldest is in high school. He's a sophomore in Central High School. My middle is in charter school at AFSA, Academy for Science and Agriculture. And my youngest, I had to put in private school this year. I work outside the home, and when COVID started last year, I had my youngest in a public school online. I couldn't expect my older 2 to come and support him because I don't work in the home. So I decided in the fall to put him in private school. It was a very tough decision, especially because I'm taking money away from the high schooler that I would be investing in college and putting in his college savings plan, and I'm giving this now to the youngest. So it was a tough decision to make, but it turned out to be a very good decision. We discovered working with the school, he's behind, so I work with him actually every day to help him catch up. And it has helped his education quite a bit. So having the opportunity for parents like me, we don't have a choice. We have to work outside the home or various situations, even if it was in person, he actually has been supported by the private school. I'd like that opportunity for my other kids, just not aware, not being day-to-day involved with their education, what is going on. Perhaps they're behind. Perhaps they'll have better opportunities at private school. So having an opportunity to pay for these services at private school is very important. And so we certainly do support this effort.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you.
Your testimony is very powerful and just really points to the power of parents. And thank you for making those decisions. Our final testifier is Simon Glazer, an English teacher from John Adams Middle School in Rochester.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Eichorn. I'm sorry?
Welcome to the committee.
Thank you. So Madam Chair, Senator Eichorn, and members of the committee, my name is Simon Glazer. I am an English teacher at John Adams Middle School in Rochester Public Schools. I've been a professional educator for 28 years, 16 of which as a teacher in E12 schools. I am here today to express strong opposition to Senate File 1153. COVID-19 has shown that public schools are at the very center of the community. Despite what some have said, our schools have not been closed for the past year. Not only have schools been open, we have been providing more services than ever before. At this time, about a year ago, Rochester Public Schools joined a partnership providing boxes with 30 pounds of free food to any member of the community. John Adams, the school where I teach, has for the past year provided free childcare to healthcare workers, law enforcement, and other frontline workers. Rochester Public Schools have adapted from hybrid to distance learning to in-person and will continue to do so to meet the academic, social, emotional, and health needs of our students. Employees have made countless home visits to promote wellness and academic success, delivering supplies as well as smiles. My colleagues and I have not been on vacation. In fact, most teachers I know say they have worked harder this year than at any point in their careers. And yet, I believe that tax policy reflects our values as a society. We pay for what we value. As I read through SF 1153, it struck me that there is a provision requiring the commissioner to increase maximum amounts for each qualifying child commensurate with inflation. This struck me because in the last funding cycle, public education was not valued as highly. After an opening position of 0.5%, the Senate eventually supported yearly increases of 2%, which was below the rate of inflation. Tax policy reflects our values as a society. Public schools are a public good. The same cannot be said for private schools. Private schools were not subject to the unfunded mandate to provide childcare for essential workers. They do not provide costly special education and language learner services. They were not required to become food distribution centers. They are not required to meet the state's accountability standards or rigorous teacher licensure expectations. Funding vouchers to private schools does not serve Minnesotans. Instead of shifting millions of dollars from the state's budget into vouchers, the state should first focus on fully funding public education. If this pandemic has served any purpose, it has been to shine a spotlight on the inequities of our current system. We cannot meet a health crisis without a school nurse in every building. We cannot meet the social, emotional needs of our students without school counselors, social workers, psychologists. We need to invest in community schools, which provide the wraparound services that our students need to thrive. As professional educators, we know how to help students in need. We know how to narrow the achievement gap. We know how to support young people who are struggling. What we lack, what we have always lacked, is the funding to support that knowledge. It is irresponsible to use taxpayer money on vouchers, an education strategy with no documented history of improving educational outcomes, and with no public accountability. The priority of the state legislature should be to fully fund public schools. Our Constitution demands it. I urge the committee to oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glazer, for your testimony. Just to let the record reflect, the education bill actually surpassed the cost of inflation in the last session, and Governor Walz signed the bill as well, saying it was a terrific education bill. So clearly, over $20 billion was funded, surpassing the cost of inflation. But Senator Eichorn, I don't read this bill as a voucher bill. Is this bill about vouchers? Senator Eichorn.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question, and it's absolutely not. It seems as though, and we've heard this, and you've heard this as well when you were the chair of the Education Committee, it seems like every time there's a bill that education in Minnesota doesn't like, it's vouchers, and that's really unfortunate. This is not about vouchers. And if you look at the credits, I don't know what family is going to pay for private school for $1,500 a year or a $3,600 credit on their taxes. It's not going to pay for a private school education. This isn't meant to, nor will it take away from public schools, but this will provide those additional enrichment opportunities for families and children who've been harmed by COVID and are dealing with this horrible achievement gap. This is going to allow them to get those extra enrichment opportunities. They're still going to be able to be in the public schools, and almost all of them still will be in the public schools. This isn't going to transition people to private schools in any way. There's not enough money for that to even be the case. But this will help our students get that extra learning they need to help them get caught back up. So no, to answer the question directly, this is not about vouchers, and it is not vouchers, no matter what anybody says.
Thank you, Senator Eichorn. Mr. Glazer, regarding your testimony, I wanted to note, are you testifying on behalf of yourself, or are you testifying on behalf of Education Minnesota? Can you, and also, Mr. Glazer, are you opposed to the bill which actually allows a tax credit for parents who have been, in many cases, augmenting, working with our public schools, but educating their children at home as well? And quite frankly, are going to need a lot of, there's a lot of learning loss that I think everyone is quite concerned about. So are you opposed to increasing the amount of the education tax credit? It hasn't been increased for years, perhaps for perhaps decades. But are you opposed to increasing the amount of the credit, Mr. Glazer?
Sorry, thank you, Senator Nelson. To answer your first question, I'm here both as a public school teacher and as a member of the Rochester Education Association. And for full disclosure, I do sit on the executive board of that body. As I can't speak as an expert on tax policy, I'm here because it seems to me that any bill or proposal that moves our public priority on education away from the public schools towards finding ways to channel that money into private education, I believe is against the public good. And I believe that our focus should be elsewhere. It is not about harming particular students, many of which I'm sure are helped by the provision. I would like to say that by placing all of our trust in public schools, we result in students like Miss Adden, who I should point out has a brother at my school and is a product of Rochester Public Schools. And I'm not sure that removing resources from those schools are to our public credit. And I do not put words in her mouth, and I do not presume to know how she feels about this bill. As I said, I'm not here as an expert on tax policy, only as an expert, as I believe, in education, who I believe this is a first step towards changing the priorities of the state away from public education. And that's the piece that I oppose.
Thank you, Mr. Glazer. Well, I can speak as the chair of the tax committee and the former chair of the education committee. Public schools are critically important to our state. 90% of our kids are in public schools, and we better have great public schools for every kid in every district. Our future depends on it. And so I appreciate your support of public schools. I think it would be helpful, Senator Eichorn, if we had our fiscal staff perhaps shed some light on exactly what Senate File 1153 does regarding tax credits, what they currently are and what your bill proposes. And so I'd like to, I see you have your hand up, Senator Eichorn, so I'll take that first as the author of the bill, and then I'd like to turn it over for a more in-depth fiscal study of really what the interaction is in this bill. Senator Eichorn.
Was actually, thank you, Madam Chair. It was actually kind of a question for you, and maybe you might be able to answer this as the former education chair. Maybe Senator Chamberlain could also answer part of this, but there seems to be the narrative that we're taking away from public schools to do this. And I assume that's not your intent. I don't think that's Senator Chamberlain's intent. It's certainly not my intent. But if we pass this bill as it stands today and is included in your omnibus bill, does this in any way take away from our public schools? Does this in any way take away from Senator Chamberlain's budget for K-12? It doesn't say that in the bill. There's no intention of that. And if you had to ask me, it does not take away. It just adds to the opportunities that are out there.
Thank you, Senator Eichorn. Now, to say that this bill would take away from education would be to say that any expense in the state budget would be taking away from public education. So that is not accurate. But let's get down to the nuts and bolts of what we're talking about with this tax credit. And so, Mr. Wilms, could you explain precisely the moving pieces in Senate File 1153?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So as you noted, there are quite a few moving pieces in the bill. I'll start by saying that the current credit and subtraction, the expenditure for both is approximately $25 million annually. It's about 16.5 million for the subtraction and then 9 million for the credit. So the subtraction is used by more filers and is broader and then the credit. And so the credit is used by fewer filers. The credit is refundable and allowed equal to 75% of eligible education expenses for qualifying children K through 12. And the household size adjustment is based on the number of children. So, families of 2 children receive more of a credit maximum than families with 1 children, and so on and so forth. And what the bill does is, in several parts, it increases the credit amount by $500 or 50%, from $1,000 to $1,500. It also softens the slope of the phase out. So right now, under current law, the phase out range for the maximum credit is increased by $2,000 for each additional child. This bill would bring that to $4,500, so a longer phase out range. It also, as noted, allows the credit for private school tuition, which currently those expenses qualify for the subtraction, but not the credit. And then the changes to the subtraction is that it increases the maximum subtraction by about 60% in the first tier, and then 56% or $1,400 in the second tier. On the revenue estimate, it notes that the total impact is an additional approximately $23 million per year in general fund effect to the state. And so that's roughly the same scope and size of what's currently in law. So it would effectively double the expenditure that is existing. And then lastly, the bill also provides for inflation. So over time, when this credit was enacted originally, over time, the inflation has kind of eroded the number of filers and the amounts that people have qualified for. And so this would sort of stop that and inflate the credit and subtraction annually.
Mr. Wills, I just want to make sure. So the K-12 subtraction, K-12 credit has not been indexed for inflation. In other words, when's the last time that we increased this credit or subtraction?
Madam Chair and committee members, the deduction was first enacted in 1955, but then in 1997, the deduction was expanded for tax year 18. And that's also the same time as the credit was established. And those were last modified around 2000. I would have to get back to you on the exact date of those, but there were some budget saving modifications in there, but really the last significant changes were around 2001.
Thank you, Mr. Wilms. So actually we're seeing it has been 20 years, maybe 2 decades until we have touched really updating the credit or the deductions. And then just to clarify, just to make sure our public testimony is very clear here, these credits, the 1153 currently, or our current K-12 subtraction and credit, and the 1153 is proposed, are not, these are, I would assume that these credits are eligible to all students. That would be 90% of Minnesota students that are in our public schools, and also eligible to those students in private schools. And I would just like to clarify that, and maybe that's something either Mr. Wilms or Ms. Pollock can clarify for the record, that these, I believe, are not just expenses or credits that are eligible for private school students. I believe they're eligible, all Minnesota families who have school-age children are eligible for these expenses.
Madam Chair, members, correct. I mean, the subtraction and the credit are for expenses paid for qualifying items. So textbooks, instructional materials, tutoring, music lessons, transportation, those kinds of things. So, those would apply regardless of where a student or a qualifying child was in school. The only difference, and which is addressed in this bill, is that the subtraction for K-12 expenses is allowed to be taken for tuition payments. The credit is not. And in this bill, the tuition would be an eligible expense for the credit.
Thank you, Ms. Pollock. So that is an expansion in eligibility there then for that particular use. Thank you very much.
Correct.
All right. We'll go to some further questions. I think the first person I saw was Senator Klein. Senator Klein.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't want to date myself, but I do remember when we did this back when Anya Carlson was governor. And I just, there's a letter circulating from a number of organizations that are opposed to Senator Eichorn's bill. I don't expect anybody that's one of the testifiers today to answer this, but it would be interesting to know if we took the word tuition out of Senator Eichorn's bill and we just increased the credit. I'd be interested to know how those groups that oppose the bill might respond. So if somebody certainly is watching this from one of those organizations, if someone could maybe send us a letter how they feel about the bill if the word tuition was taken out. I can tell you, Madam Chair, I think they should support it. The reality is this is a way to get more money into K-12 without Senator Chamberlain having to argue for a target. So committee chairs should always be looking for ways to get more money into their budget. And this would put an extra $23 million a year into the hands of parents for K-12 education. So I think people need to think about that rather than the old traditional every dollar has to fall on the K-12 formula. Maybe there's other ways to get some money into the K-12 system. So little creativity there, but someone send us an email or a letter saying if we took the word tuition out, how would all those organizations respond? Thank you, Madam Chair. And I remember I think we tried to add summer school one time when we weren't successful with that. And I didn't see that in Senator Eichorn's draft, at least not the quick look I took at it. Let me just suggest, Senator Eichorn, might not be the worst idea to add summer school into this program. Not all parents, if summer school is going to be offered this year, it's going to be offered in a big way, I think. And we've got a lot of one-time money to be able to do that. Clearly, our kids have gotten significantly behind over this last year. And we're going to have to spend some money to help do what we can to help them catch up. But that money of ours probably is going to touch every student in every building. So making sure that every kid in the state has an opportunity to do summer school, if somehow this tax credit helps with that, I think that's probably worth having a conversation about. That's it, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bach. Clearly, we do need to have that clarification. I did not see any of those opposition letters, but clearly the majority of the bill addresses all students. So thank you for that. We'll look for that clarification. I think the next hand I saw was Senator Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for hearing the bill. Thank you, Senator Eichorn, for hearing the bill. By the way, I love your choice in shirt and tie today. And Senator Bach, your question about what if we eliminated the word tuition from the bill, I think we'll get a chance to discuss that with the next bill, which Senator Nelson has kindly put on the agenda, which is a similar sort of update in the credit for K-12 expenses without that one particular provision. But I do have a question for Mr. Wilms. When you generated the revenue note on this, do you know the amount of cost that was generated in the bill by that provision around private tuition? That is credits for private tuition. What do you estimate those are going to end up costing the state in tax?
Madam Chair and Senator Klein, the revenue estimate published by DOR actually indicates that line item on the K-12 education credit. It shows the reduction for that portion, that provision, as approximately 10 million annually. So about half of the proposal is related to that specific provision.
So follow up, Madam Chair.
Senator Klein.
So yeah, I guess I would just then ask a quick question of Senator Eichorn, and understand that we don't want to call these vouchers because that generates a debate that's been running around the legislature for many years, but it's $10 million in tax relief for private school tuition. I guess What do you want to call it? And what's your intention, I guess, with putting that in this particular bill, if not to sort of generate interest in transfers from public to private institutions?
Senator Eichorn?
The interest is creating additional, Madam Chair, sorry, Senator Klein, the interest in this is creating additional education opportunities for students. Again, there's going to be summer school in a big way, as Senator Bach had mentioned. The state's certainly going to pay for some of that, but there's going to be gaps. Going forward, there's going to be gaps. I could foresee this being an opportunity, obviously, into the future. This isn't something that's going to take kids out of the public school. It's not creating a voucher system. We can call it whatever we want, but there is no voucher system created under the bill. But into the future, there aren't a lot always of summer school opportunities within the public school system. There are enrichment and other education opportunities sometimes out of the school system. That doesn't say the public school system can't do it, but it's an additional way to help kids get ahead. And that's the real goal of this.
Thank you, Senator Eichorn. I believe in Mr. Wilms, is your hand up for some further clarification?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. One other thing I forgot to add is on the revenue estimate, it identifies that when more filers take the credit, there will be savings to the subtraction. So a portion of the credit for tuition, a small portion, the amount is shifted into the credit, and so there's savings on the subtraction. So it's roughly 10 million, but give or take based on that shift, about 750,000 or so. So I just wanted to clarify that for the record.
Yes, and Mr. Wilms, just to be clear, there is currently a credit for tuition or subtraction. Either, which one is it?
Yes, so currently the tuition is allowed under the subtraction and does not qualify for the credit.
Thank you.
And so, yeah.
Thank you. Next, I see Senator Dietzing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just also like to encourage Senator Eichorn to look at summer school, like Senator Bach said, because I think we are going to have a lot of students that either need that catch up or just for their social emotional growth, want to be around their friends. And especially as we go, hopefully the pandemic slows down so we can go in person. And then Chair Nelson, you're aware there's summer academic enrichment programs, which are a little different. And I don't know if they qualify for the credit. And so those are schools that usually comes through Office of Higher Ed, but they are particular programs that there is a process that they go through to get qualified and to qualify for that program, and they are pretty rigorous coursework. And so that might be something that also is interesting to some students that maybe we want to consider adding to here. I don't know, I'd have to look at it more, but I'm just suggesting it and willing to work with you if that's something that we want to consider.
Thank you, Senator Dietzing. Yes, there is great learning loss amongst our students, and there is going to be intensive summer school. I'm also glad to know the federal government is well aware of this and anticipating about $128 billion sent out for our public schools across the nation. It looks like perhaps an additional $2 billion. That's just very rough to Minnesota, and they have sent over $1 billion already. But we're going to need those federal dollars. They have the levers. In the state of Minnesota, we have to balance our budget, and that's tough. It's good. I'm glad we have that requirement, but it makes for tough decisions. Now, the feds, on the other hand, they can kind of send out that money, and they don't have that balanced budget requirement. So we are going to be looking to our federal partners, but we should be doing what we can do in the state of Minnesota as well. And my intent today is to hear Senator Rest's bill as well, take in all the comments. The committee has been phenomenal with these comments and really fashioning something that is going to help our students. So with that, Senator Eichorn, do you have any closing comments? I am not seeing any further comments from members. So Senator Eichorn, to closing comments.
Thank you. I'm just going to add one additional piece on the tuition part. On that end, on that front, we talked about summer school a little bit. I think we're going to see summer school in a big way this summer, but what about the summers in the future? There needs to be ongoing opportunities for that 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, whatever it may be. So that's why this is important to keep going. We are going to see summer school in a big way this year, I think, but on those ongoing opportunities are important. And on the tuition and academic front, the courses will have to be academic in nature. It'll have to include courses like reading, math, science, history, fine arts. Does not include sports, athletic activities, does not include religious instruction, and those courses will have to be taught by a qualified instructor who is not the child's sibling, parent, or grandparent. So just another additional clarification on that as well for members. Again, the way we see this is an opportunity to help kids and families directly. And in the time of this pandemic, this is needed now more than ever. So I just want to thank you. We heard from great testifiers for the need for this bill. Our first two testifiers were phenomenal on helping build the case for that. And I thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to have the discussion today and for having really a broad discussion around this, because this is the way we can directly help families in a tangible way. So thank you again.
Thank you, Senator Eichorn. The bill, Senate file, let's see here, number 1153 will be laid over for possible inclusion.